right. I am, again, Nick Adams from GLAAD. Thank you all for being here. And I'm also going to let you guys introduce yourselves because you can do it much better than I can. So we're going to start here and we'll go down.
I'm Carla Mosley. I'm an actress and currently play Maya Avant Forrester on The Bold and the Beautiful.
I'm Dilo. I'm mostly stand-up and actor, solo theater artist. I've been on Transparent and a little part in Glee and Sense8 and Looking.
I'm Trace Lissette, and I am part of the guest cast on Transparent and Blunt Talk on Stars, and I also appeared on I Am Kate a couple times.
I'm Candace Kane. I started in 2007 with a role on a show called Dirty Sexy Money on ABC. I did a little show before that on CBS it was a CSI New York episode, so that was kind of my first appearance in television. And since then I've worked on a lot of different things, and then recently I've been on the amazing I Am Kate, which is changing the world.
So I want to start with Carla. The one difference that you have up here from the other panelists is that you are not a trans actor, and you were hired to play Maya, and she was not a trans character when you were hired to play it. So we heard a little bit from Brad and Patrick's side, but what were your thoughts and reactions when they came to you and told you that Maya Avant was going to be disclosed to be a transgender woman? And how did you prepare when you got the news that you were going to play this part?
Yeah, I was really pleasantly surprised that our show was planning on tackling this issue. It was important to me, and what I heard pretty much instantly from Brad is that they were interested in telling the story in an authentic and grounded and human way. And one of my first questions is, why me? You know, I'm a Black actor, and I understand the importance of being able to tell our own stories. And so, as a cisgender woman, you know, why am I the person to tell this story? Why this body? And but I think that there have been benefits to the fact that the audience has known Maya as a cisgender woman for 2 years, and now has been introduced to her, introduced to the fact that she's trans. That the audience, and I've been watching it on social media, has had to go through many of the emotions that friends and family go through with people that they've known. So that's been an interesting positive side. And then just to recognize my privilege as a cisgender woman being in a position to tell the story, and to prepare as much as I could to educate myself, to talk to friends, and read as much material, listen, and I continue to do that.
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know, the word cisgender, cis is the Latin for same, where trans is the Latin for different or crossing over. So cisgender simply is a word for someone who's not transgender. So it's not commonly known, so I thought I'd throw that out there. Yeah. When I met you early on in the process, and they asked me to come in and do a media training for the actors on kind of how to talk about playing and talk about this storyline, one of the first things you said to me was, I've already read Janet Mock's book, and I watched the hour-long conversation between Laverne Cox and Bell Hooks. And I was like, oh, this actor is already so far ahead of, you know, most people in terms of you really wanting to kind of do your homework and do the story justice. And then the show, it was mentioned earlier, there is also a trans actor on the show named Scott Turner Schofield, who couldn't be here today because he's a very popular public speaker, and he had a commitment and an engagement today. But he is a transgender actor who's been brought on to play a character who is Maya's friend from early on in her transition, and in fact performed the wedding for Rick and Maya in the room where we're going to have our lunch. Mm-hmm. So I think that was really been good too for the audience of The Bold and the Beautiful to meet that character who they know is played by a trans actor as well, and kind of get that perspective.
Yeah, it's been important to have, you know, with Scott's character on the show and the fashion show, and then we are starting to see, you know, as was spoken about earlier, people in our crew, you know. So I think it's amazing how awareness happens and how activism seeps into our daily lives, and how life can imitate art. And that in the beginning, when the sort of secret was sort of leaking to the cast and crew, just hearing little jokes and comments, but as time has gone on, that people are educated and correcting themselves, and just open to other experiences. Yeah.
And Candace, so you have been working as an actress in Hollywood now for a while. We won't say how long, but and those of us in the LGBT community certainly have known of you for years, been fans of you for years, knew how talented and successful you had been in Hollywood. Your role on Dirty Sexy Money, I think, was the first kind of regular transgender, no, not the first, that would be The Education of Max Bickford, I take that back. But the first regular transgender character in a series played by a transgender actress, for sure. How have you seen things change over the last 10 or 15 years that you have been, a working actor in Hollywood?
Well, when I first started, there was no archetype, there was no one. And so you just kind of were hoping that you would get a part. Maybe they'll write a trans character in, and I would just go to auditions and hope. And now there is a lot of trans characters that are being written. So a lot of actors out there who are trans feel like now they can have a way to break into the industry. There was no one for me to look up to and say, oh, I want to do that. I mean, there was Tula, a Bond girl, but other than that, there wasn't really anybody that I could remember. And for the first time in my life, I feel like the wind is at my back as opposed to on my face. Like, I'm going to auditions all the time. I'm doing projects. It's an amazing feeling to be considered to start to be considered just an actress as opposed to an oddity. You know what I mean? So it's cool.
And certainly, I think I will say, in my own opinion, you are the breakout star of I Am Kate. And Jeff is not really waiting for the romance to happen. He's making it happen with the Candace Caitlin romance, which I ship completely. What have you felt like has been the response to I Am Kate? And people, do they recognize you? Do you feel like Hollywood is more interested in you, or you're more on the radar for them now? What has been the impact of being on I Am Kate?
Well, I mean, yeah, the visibility level is pretty huge, and I get stopped all the time now, which is really cool. But everybody comes up to me and just gives me love. I mean, I had this one yesterday in Whole Foods. This one Latin guy came up to me and said, me and my girlfriend wait for Sundays so we can watch the show. And I told her, you come into the Glendale Whole Foods all the time. And she was like, shut up. And he was like, no, she does. And so I had to tell you that. And I was like, oh my God, this is really crazy, but it's amazing, That's great. And so it's been really, really good. And, just as far as, the industry having general meetings for the first time, with networks and casting directors, which I never had before because I was always just kind of put away. And if a trans prostitute role comes up, you can be, you can audition for this, that kind of thing. That's where it started. And then Dirty Sexy kind of changed it because they wrote a love story for the first time. And so it wasn't only the first trans being on a network show as a reoccurring character, it was really the first time that you saw a trans character have feelings and emotions with somebody who was cisgender. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. So GLAAD also, every November, we put out a report that looks at transgender images on TV, and we actually have looked back now at the last 13 years of how television specifically has portrayed trans characters. And we sort of ranked them according to, fairness and accuracy, or whether the character was multidimensional or not. And using that ranking, about 88% of the portrayals ranged from horrifically offensive to mediocre, barely acceptable, you know? And 12% that we looked at were considered really groundbreaking enough, for example, to get a GLAAD Media Award nomination. And the way those characters have largely been portrayed over the entirety of television has been, sex worker is the most common profession shown for a transgender character on television. As Zachary mentioned before, oftentimes the victim, and if they're not, and not an empathetic victim, not the kind of victim that you care about the fact that they died, they're just there to be a dead body. Right. Or villain, psychopathic serial killer. And the linking together of being trans and being some sort of killer, serial killing psychopath is very common. And so it has to be difficult as an actor to, when you look at those roles, be like, oh, you know. And I hope that as the shows we're talking about today, that we are going to begin to see more diverse range. One of the things I love about Maya's story, you did have a love story, but it was the mistress.
It was the mistress.
Not the wife.
Not the wife.
But the fact that Maya gets to have an epic love story with Rick is something I can't remember ever seeing a trans character get to have before. So I think that's powerful.
It's exciting, and when Scott came to set, he kind of echoed that, and it really helped me to feel like, okay, we're on the right track here. Yeah.
So Trace, you, a little newer, coming to Hollywood to begin your career as an actress and immediately end up on Transparent, which is, you know, a pretty good start. With your newer perspective, how have you been experiencing when you go out for auditions, or how are you interested in also not just going out for auditions for the trans roles that are out there, but also non-trans roles?
Yeah. Well, I started that way. I started going out when I started acting back in 2008. There really wasn't much work around trans characters, and we weren't as far along in understanding trans people in general. So at that point in my life, I was living what we call stealth in the trans community, where you just really don't disclose your trans history, your gender history to people. And I compartmentalized my life, and certainly in the acting world, I didn't disclose to anyone besides my agent about my gender history. So I started auditioning for cisgender, non-trans roles, and I lucked up on a guest spot on Law & Order, which was kind of like my first big job, I guess. I did one other independent film that was like a 30-minute film that actually never got released because the producers found out about my gender history and they canned the film. And so we never got to see it. But it wasn't the best quality anyway, so it's okay. And then around the time I landed the Law & Order, I had a really powerful conversation with my good friend Laverne Cox from Orange is the New Black, who I've known for over a decade. And I saw her success walking in her truth and playing an out, proud trans woman on TV in a trans role, and just living her life and being transparent. And it inspired me, and I knew that that's the direction I had to go. I had this burning feeling inside of me to kind of go that way. And around that same time, a woman by the name of Elon Nettles was beaten to death a block from my apartment in New York City. A trans woman of color. And it just shook me to my core. And so I knew I wasn't doing my trans brothers and sisters any justice by existing in the closet and not living as my full authentic self. So I made the decision to start auditioning for trans roles. And Sense8 came along, Transparent came along. I landed a small recurring role on Transparent as Shay, the yoga teacher. And yeah, I love it. It's fulfilling to be able to play trans characters, and that was my coming out party. But now the challenge for me as an actor and not a series regular on any particular show is to find stable, steady work, and not only in auditioning for trans roles, but for cisgender non-trans roles as well, and getting back to that. I think that's the next frontier, is when maybe we just let the audience decide, and like why does the gender history always have to be specified and sensationalized? And maybe we can get to a point where trans actors can play a character and their gender history is more of an afterthought than the first thing that is disclosed.
Dilo. So first of all, I love all the groundbreaking portrayals that we're having now of transgender women in the media, and it's really important that we talk about that because transgender women, quite frankly, take, I think, the brunt of the transphobia in our culture. But I also, as I said before, I never even saw a transgender man in the media till I was 33, and transgender men are still not as commonly seen in the media. I'm glad Scott's on The Bold and the Beautiful, and Ian Harvey was in season 1 of Transparent in a couple of episodes. So from your perspective as a transgender actor and transgender man working in Hollywood, like, what do you hope to see in terms of more visibility for transgender men? And I know that you also have kind of taken matters in your own hands of sort of creating your own stories and shows and theater work around your own experiences because that's what you needed to do to get your story told. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I resonate with your story a lot, not from the stealth perspective, but from, you know, having to figure, you know, as transgender people, we, you know, queer and trans people are, you know, creatives, artists, you know, are always creating with that different lens, and yet it's only when the cis world co-ops our stuff that it gets blown up. Thank you, Madonna. So it's like, you know, I feel like one thing that I knew I could always act, and I love doing and performing, but even understanding the Hollywood world and the industry as this, and whether I was, you know, passing or not passing, was like, I knew that I couldn't sustain financially. And you talk about stability, and that's definitely on my mind. Is it that trans men get roles only when they're passing, when they look like what cisgender men are supposed to look like? What happens to the gender nonconforming trans community? You know, I feel like as a trans masculine person, I too crave to see full stories flushed out around trans masculinity. Why trans masculine people, you know, how they define their manhood, and because that's a thought, you know, it's something that privileged cisgender men don't have to think about, how they want to walk with their masculinity or their manness. And I think that that's something, in the same way that we're talking about activism in Hollywood, I think that's the same kind of route that can be taken with sharing these stories. So I'm interested to see it. Of course, I'm interested to play it, but really, I think that there's a dearth of trans masculine people in the media.
And I know that also your family is from Sri Lanka, and you took your show and your artistry to Sri Lanka and India. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that as a parent, as someone whose parents were immigrants, and as a person of color, like what that was like, kind of doing your trans artwork overseas?
Absolutely. You know, sometimes I feel like India is way ahead of the curve on trans stuff than the States, because they actually allow you to identify as trans on your passport. And there's a whole history of the Aravani, or the Hijra community in South Asia. I got to go on a 6-city tour throughout India with the stand-up storytelling show. And then when I came back, when I went to Sri Lanka to visit some family, I had received a Ford Foundation travel grant to talk with trans, or to workshop with theater folk who are trans and queer. And it's incredible, because they do look to America on some of the media stuff, and around queer stuff, and around activist stuff as well. Or not America, maybe just the Western world, where there's a lot more language. But one thing that is just like amazing to me is that as a foreigner coming in, the amount of talent and the amount of you know, creative outlets that I saw in especially the south of India, I was like, it pained me to see that they're still, you know, because we influence so much from over here, that also resonates over there, and they're still struggling on that point too. Though they do have, I think, 2 trans people who are on news stations over there regularly, you know. But I often think about, like, you know, the privilege that we have in the States, how that resonates for trans people and trans artists internationally, and how they look to us to prove to networks or to prove to other creative people, like, look, we too want to do stuff and make a living, and, you know, all that.
Great. And Carla, since The Bold and the Beautiful is in so many countries, have you gotten any sense yet of what the international reaction is like? I know that you recently accepted an award. Was it in
Monte Carlo, yeah.
Monte Carlo, for The Bold and the Beautiful, and your speech there was very powerful because you talked about trans people and the need for more equality and justice. Have you gotten a sense of the international impact of The Bold and the Beautiful yet at this point?
So far, it's been overwhelmingly positive, you know, it's really fun to see, you know, Maya disclosed to Rick today in Italy, you know, Maya in France. It's like everyone's waiting for it to kind of roll out. But it will be interesting to see as we get to some of the more conservative countries what the response is. But I do think that the way that it's been structured is such that it is a love story. And, you know, even just in the States and in the more conservative areas where I saw resistance from the beginning, now people are rooting for them to be together. And, you know, and the resistance was really, so much of it, which was interesting to me, was confusion. You know, like, it was like, well, what does this mean? You know, and so I just made myself available to people as much as I could and tried to direct them if I hadn't had the experience, to direct them to someone who had, or, you know, the internet's amazing for that, you know. So I think it is about just being known and hearing these stories and beginning to know people, because once we attach stories to humanity, then we can't help but at least have some inkling, even if it's in the back of our minds, behind all of our prejudice and preconceived notion, that there might be a different possibility.
Right. And I think also one of the challenges with trans storytelling in the media over the last several decades is that so often people want to tell the transition story, right? The transgender version of the gay coming out story. So when I was young, because I'm very old, in the 80s, every gay story on TV or in the media was the coming out story for the gay person. When did you know? Who did you tell? Blah, 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 blah. And we've so far moved beyond that now in terms of telling stories about gay people in the media. You have on TV conniving gay lawyers on How to Get Away with Murder, and, you know, goofy gay dads on Modern Family, and you have this wide range of LGBT characters on television. But so often, what people want to focus on in the media about trans characters is the transition narrative, still the coming out story and the physical changes and all that. And one of the things that I really love about Maya's story on The Bold and the Beautiful is not a transition narrative. It was not we're going to watch this quote unquote man become a quote unquote woman, you know, so often they want to focus on. This was a story about someone who was living her authentic truth as a woman and then choosing to disclose to other people, as Trey said, her gender history, right? Which is really nobody's business unless it's your business, right? So I thought that was an educational part of this show as well, which is you got to see someone who was like, no, I am a trans woman, but I didn't choose to disclose that to you the minute I met you, because why was it relevant, you know? And I think that the show, even though you backed into it because you didn't intend this character to be trans, that turned out to be a really productive and great part of that storytelling. And then your character also on Transparent, and Alexander Billings' character, again, nice and lovely that they're in the show because they've already living as who they really are. You know, it's the Maura character who's going through her transition at that moment and is the catalyst for the show. But the show allows viewers to get to know other trans people who are already their authentic selves. And do you guys get frustrated with the transition narrative element of so many of the storytelling things? Like, do you hope we get other types of stories being told?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, I'm
Candace
so
is
happy
like,
too.
I mean, it just seems like every really juicy Oscar-winning role is being written for cis people to play.
A lot of times because it's a transition narrative.
Right, and a lot of times because it's a transition narrative. If it was if there were more for every opportunity for those kind of roles to come along, that would be fine. But when every role that's written for an award is played for you know, a non-trans person, as a trans actor, it gets a little frustrating, you know.
Yeah,
Not that I
think
want that part, but that, because I might not be right for a part. I have to earn that part, and I understand that. But to get the chance to earn a part would be great. You
It's
know?
the fact that we're not even getting in the room that's the problem. And that's a part of the way Hollywood works. And that's a conversation we need to have as well, I think.
Sorry. So yes, I think that, and I really do also think that Laverne Cox in Orange is the New Black did bring to people's attention, like, oh, look, when you cast a trans woman to play a trans part, she can kill it. She can bring a real authenticity to it. She can embody it in a way that we really haven't seen before. And I think that because the media is such a competitive environment and people are looking for that fresh and new thing to do, I think that audiences are drawn to when they see these, you know, trans characters being portrayed by trans people. Not that it's the only way that it can be done, but it brings a certain element to it, I think, that people and viewers do find powerful. So hopefully, what do you think the biggest obstacle is at this point? Is it casting people not really kind of understanding how to cast trans roles? Is it, do you think it's like that there aren't enough trans actors out there right now?
It's really about box office. You know what I mean? I mean, that's what it comes down to, it boils down to. So if you decide maybe sometime to write a movie where there's a transcentric, you know, cast, but cast a lot of the other people, the other leads, you know, that are stars, and then maybe focus on casting that one lead who is trans as a trans, you know what I mean? I mean, that's just another option. That's a way of going about it, you know, that. But I'm saying that this should be all inclusive. Everybody as an actor should be able to play everything, you know what I mean? But a lot of times trans people who are known trans actors aren't even brought in to play cisgender roles. So it's lopsided.
It is an employment issue in many ways.
It's an employment
And
issue.
I think it is important, you know, as someone who is playing it, is a cisgender person playing a trans role, I do think it's important that people are able to tell their stories, because there are things that I couldn't know because it wasn't my experience. And as many books as I read, like that's just not going to be the case. And so to have, you know, and not only in acting, but in the writers' rooms and, you know, producing as showrunners, you know, it's an important conversation, and I'm excited to see it beginning to change, but it is happening slowly.
Well, we have here in the front row Jen Richards, who's also in I Am Kate, one of the cast members of I Am Kate, who has a new project that she has written and it stars in with Angelica Ross called Her Story, which is about two trans women, played by trans women, written by trans women, directed by a trans woman, playing two you know, two falling in love stories, basically. Just sort of your typical kind of charming, like, oh, I've met somebody new and now I like her, and the other trans woman meets somebody new and now I like him, but looking at it from a trans perspective. And I think that when trans people are able to begin to create and tell our own stories, all the media portrayals of our lives are going to benefit as well. So I'm really grateful that you guys are, I'm getting the high sign, willing to put yourselves out there to try to make it in this cutthroat business, which is very difficult, I know, but especially to do it from the perspective of out trans people who are willing to talk about our experiences, create our own media, and kind of bring real authenticity to the roles that you are all playing, including you, Carla, because you do a phenomenal job. And it sounds like with that, we are going to wrap this panel up and have some lunch. So I know that you are all very excited about that part of it. Thank you all for coming very much. And the lunch is that direction.